Hi guys, and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be discussing the lymphatic system in probably more detail than is absolutely necessary. But we'll start off with the broad strokes, which is going to be what we need to know for the certification exams. Then we'll take a look at a few diagrams to try and make sense of the few words available in our textbooks. Lastly, we'll go over a couple of diseases that involve the lymphatic system that we find in our textbooks. And I swear this will all be useful stuff to know, and it will hopefully make the information in our textbooks a lot easier to understand. If you're new here, hi, my name is Julia Walker, and I make videos going over the main topics that come up on our certification exams for Farriers. I'm attempting to make these certification topics more memorable and easier to learn, hopefully without making any factual errors along the way. And if you're not a Farrier, that's totally okay too. I just like talking about anatomy and breaking things down, so hopefully this is helpful for you. But with all that being said, here we go. So what does the lymph system do exactly? Well, it's part of the immune system as well as the circulatory system. It has special cells in its nodes called lymphocytes, as well as a lot of white blood cells to help kill off bad things in the blood. It also drains excess fluid from the spaces between the cells, so you can think of it like the drainage and water treatment system of the body. The two things we need to know that it does are to drain fluid, and in doing so prevent swelling, and to also detect diseases in the fluid that it drains. Now, from a certification standpoint, there are only a couple of things we need to know, so I'm putting them here as a main takeaway, and if this is all you need to know, great. We have our sources up top, and there's basically one sentence that sums it all up in Butler's book, which is that lymph carries cell waste products and fluid that leaks out of the cells back to the heart to be mixed back into the bloodstream. If you can remember that, perfect. That is it. He also talks about a lymph vessel plexus being around the digital cushion / frog area, which is probably a good thing to know. But the lymph system was always kind of a foggy idea for me when I read about it in our textbooks, so if the whole image still isn't clear, or if that raises more questions than answers for you, we'll go into it a little more now. The best way I can think to describe this involved a little bit more specific information and lots of drawings and visualizations, so that's what we will do. Overall, the lymphatic system works as a part of the circulatory system, but unlike the nerves, arteries, and veins, it has its own separate structure and connections. It kind of vibes like the veins and their venous plexes, in that it draws out of small spaces and the vessels keep joining up with each other and combining into bigger and bigger vessels. Eventually, the main lymph vessels dump their fluid back into the bloodstream up by the heart. The lymph system has special structures in it, though, the most important of which are the lymph nodes. Those are like little checkpoint pockets along the lymph vessels that contain special cells that detect diseases called lymphocytes, as well as a lot of white blood cells. If the lymphocytes find unusual cells in the lymph fluid while they scan, they signal the body that there's a problem and trigger an immune response. The lymph nodes have their own little blood supply and are sometimes found in clusters in specific areas of the body. There weren't a lot of good diagrams online for the horse's lymphatic system, so I combined a few and sketched up this. It's not scientifically accurate, but it's a basic idea of how this works. Horses have a few clusters of nodes at like the base of their jaw and the base of their neck, for example. Their hindquarters, kind of in this area as well, but probably more places too. All the vessels basically lead back to the heart, somewhere in here, where there are fewer larger vessels in general. So where does that lymphatic fluid come from exactly? Well, we usually think about the circulatory system as being a closed system, right? The blood goes from the arteries to the capillaries, down to the cells, back up into the capillaries, to the veins, and up to the heart. It turns out that there's some fluid leakage in that process when the fluid is going in and out of the cells. It doesn't all make it back into the capillaries and veins, basically. According to the internet, my source, it's like 10% of the fluid that gets left behind, which isn't a crazy amount, but it's definitely a significant chunk of it. And if that fluid can't be drained out, it'll just stay in the tissue, causing swelling and other accumulation of waste. So the lymph vessels drain that extra fluid and check its quality before dumping it back into the circulatory system. A super basic diagram of how this works looks something like this. The standard diagram of the artery, capillary, vein diagram in that red, purple, and blue, with the lymphatic system in green, coming off of the spaces between the capillaries. So zooming in a little bit, you'll see that inside the gaps between the capillaries are tissue cells, shown as yellow circles. So that would be like a cell. The tiny starts of the lymph vessels are basically like biological pipes that sit with their openings in the spaces between the cells, which are called the interstitial spaces, in case you're curious. And then those lymph vessels combine with each other into bigger and bigger vessels as they go up. So yes, this here is that interstitial space. Cool. Then there are a couple other terms that get thrown around when talking about the lymph system, which can be a bit confusing, so I wanted to clear the air a bit. Lymph fluid gets used a lot, or just lymph for short, but you might be wondering what that is, and it's simple. It's just basically blood plasma, which is like the watery part of the blood. But when the plasma leaves the bloodstream and goes into the space between the cells, that interstitial space, it gets renamed to be interstitial fluid. And then if that fluid goes into the lymph vessels instead of going back into the bloodstream to become plasma again, it gets renamed to be lymph or lymph fluid. So just like Shakespeare said, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Lymph fluid is blood plasma that is just inside the lymph vessels instead of inside the blood vessels. And that's all you need to know about that. Cool. So to diagram that, there's a blood vessel on the left where the watery component of the blood is referred to as the blood plasma. Then it carries nutrients and whatever into the tissue cells. So it kind of goes into the cells and exchanges and then comes back out. And while it's doing that, it's called that interstitial fluid. And then it takes waste products out of the cells back into like a vein over here and back up to the heart, where it turns back into plasma. But if it is carrying waste up into the lymph vessels instead of finding its way back into a vein, it gets renamed into being called lymph or lymph fluid. So that's really all there is to this. It's the same thing. So obviously this was an opportunity to draw a little animation, and I took it. So here's some plasma / interstitial fluid / lymph going to and from the cells and occasionally up and out via the lymph system. It's simplified, of course, but really it's just the same little dot moving from one side to the other and going different places. So think of it that way. It's the same thing. And here's another diagram with the arrows representing what the fluid is called when it goes from point A to point B. Functionally, this is basically how the whole thing works. Now, other lymphatic system-based stuff that we should know from our textbooks would include diseases that involve the lymphatic system. So firstly, we have lymphangitis, which is often confused with cellulitis. On the left is a horse with lymphangitis, and on the right, cellulitis. We see cellulitis more often, but that is an infection of a deeper layer of the skin, which is often accompanied by like a fever and lameness of that leg, or also soreness to the touch of the affected skin. Lymphangitis is different. It's an inflammation of the lymphatic system in a leg, either due to like an infection of the lymph system, blockage, disease. There's a few different kinds, but sometimes it develops into ulcers or is infectious, depending on the type. As you can see, it's really hard to like visually tell the difference, so usually they just start treating for cellulitis, and if that doesn't work, they see if it might be lymphangitis or something else. So keep in mind, a thick leg isn't always cellulitis. So don't go diagnosing anything to your customers. You could be totally wrong, which is good advice for us all. Another disease that involves the lymphatic system is chronic progressive lymphedema. You see that more often in draft breeds underneath lots of thick feathers where the skin gets thick, forms rolls, folds, or bumps, and can sometimes have open sores develop. Early stages can look like scratches since the skin will get a bit flaky, and there could be problems that develop in the coronary band, even persistent thrush, all that good stuff. It involves the lymph system getting compromised, so infections of the skin and surrounding tissues don't heal properly, leading to a bunch of scar tissue and other tissue that lymph vessels can't reach into, since they can only reach into healthy tissue. It progresses over time since the lymph system gets less and less able to fix the problem, so it just kind of sucks in general. Now that we know what we know about the lymph system, though, you can hopefully kind of see how the lymph fluid not being able to be drained and treated by the lymphocytes in the lymph nodes could result in something like this. And that's really all that a person could say about the lymphatic system as it matters to us farriers. There's the pages to read in the textbook again. This is the lymphedema type stuff. Remember that lymph vessels form their own separate branch of the circulatory system, draining excess fluid. We know that lymph nodes help scan the lymph fluid, which is just blood plasma, and make sure that there isn't any suspicious disease activity happening down by the cells, and that the nodes can trigger the body to kill off any diseases that they find. Wonderful. Well, that wraps up the lymphatic system. It was more information than we have in our books, but hopefully it makes the information we do have a lot more memorable. Thanks for sticking around for it. Next up, we're going to be talking about the microcirculation in the lamina, which is definitely more of a journeyman topic, but I should think it's interesting for just about everyone. It's a little above my pay grade to, teach. I'm not an expert in circulation. I'm not a vet. I don't really know anything, but I'll try to make sure that the things that I include are accurate, and I will try to break down the stuff in our textbooks to a level that is more simple to understand. That much I feel confident doing. It'll be another big undertaking, but I'm eager to take it on. And of course, any corrections you may have for this video are more than welcome if I made a mistake. If you have any other questions, I'd love to hear from you, was that too deep or not deep enough? Did you learn anything? Was there another disease that involves the lymphatic system that you think we should hear about? Let me know what you think. In the meantime, I'll keep cracking away at these topics, and I hope you have fun with the rest of your studying. Best of luck out there, and as always, stay tuned for more.